Hello, everyone. Welcome to this slightly delayed start there. Bit of a technical issue here, which has now been resolved, and we are now live with you for our session around creating a CV for an NED trustee position. Because of the timing, I'm going to get straight into our questions straight away then. And first up is a question around really what the rationale is for why people might put themselves forward for an NED or a trustee position. Anj, maybe if I can start with you on this one, and tell
Absolutely.
us from a trustee point of view. Brilliant.
So very quickly, there are multiple reasons for considering putting yourself forward for a trustee role. So what I would say to you is to consider your own personal motivations. For all of you listening, is it for your personal development, your career development, to expand your networks, to boost your profile, to showcase your skills in a way that might help you get a promotion? There are lots of reasons for undertaking a trusteeship.
Brilliant. Okay. And David, from your perspective, either a trustee or NED, what's your thoughts on that?
I think I'm much less experienced than Anj in the the not-for-profit sector. But one of the things I would say about not-for-profit trusteeships is that they're a very good way of an earlier part of your career getting some credibility, as in for being a non-exec later on, because it shows that you have an understanding of the whole governance issues, which otherwise is quite difficult to prove. When you come to an NED, they are nearly always people moving towards the end of their careers where they're looking to stay involved with business, but not actually to be doing a full-time role. In that regard, it's quite useful if you can to do one slightly earlier in your career, because at least again that gets you the credibility for later on. The one thing I would say, however, is under no circumstances should you look at this as a career, because you should never ever do a non-exec portfolio career purely for the money. One, they aren't really that well paid, and secondly, if you're doing it for the money, you take away one of the major, or in fact the last sanction that you have, which is to say, I'm walking out, I'm leaving the board. And if you're doing it for the money, that makes it a little bit more difficult.
And I know before we went live, we were saying, so I perhaps shouldn't think about applying for 20 different NED roles and doing them all at once, to have that as a career with one pot of money for absolutely those reasons.
Well, especially as normally people would say 4/5 is the maximum.
Okay. Right. And that's because of that distribution of time, but also so that you can really put the right amount of effort in, I assume.
Yes, absolutely. And although people will say it's 20-25 days a year, so 4 or 5 is still half a working year. Actually, that's fine as long as something doesn't go wrong. And if something goes wrong, you can find yourself in there flat out full time.
Got you. Okay, good to know. Right. Well, I won't be falling for that one. I'll make sure that if it's good for everybody to recognise that about the number as 4 or 5 as a max. I think it's really useful because people may not have considered that. What I'd really like us to think about then is, quite a lot of people might be familiar about how they would do their CV for a normal, regular job application. David, if I stay with you from an NED perspective, how would that, my normal CV, how would that differ for an NED role?
Well, I always preface any comments about CVs with the fact that if you change your CV because somebody says, "Oh, this is how I think you should do it," the next person who looks at it will say, "I wouldn't do it like that." And it is a very personal thing. It is your marketing document. You must feel comfortable with it. And that's the most important thing. What you're doing in your non-exec CV is bringing out the bits in your CV that people want to buy, because they want to buy your experience. They're not just buying you for the governance and, you know, basically turning up for a nice lunch once a quarter and going away. They want your experience and how you can bring that experience to bear. So your CV needs to show what you've done in your executive career, probably not in as much detail as you would in your executive CV, but certainly bringing out the things that you've done and what you really achieved. That's the most important thing.
Brilliant. And Anj, from a trustee perspective, what's your thoughts on CV and how it might differ to a normal job application?
Slightly different to David, because the majority of trustee roles are tend to be for micro, small, and the small size of medium. So avoid your industry jargon. Do showcase your skills, and it's good to consider maybe splitting out your key skills and key recent achievements, but think about how relevant they are to the charity as well, because you are not applying for a job, you're applying for a trusteeship, which are largely unpaid volunteer roles, so quite different to NED roles. And also keep it brief, keep it to two sides. Often your email is enough. You don't need to add your address unless it's for something for a charity that is operating in a particular area and it's a more locally based charity. But do use the cover letter well. I've been a charity chair. I've been the chair of a committee of a university recruiting independent governors. And that's, you know, large and quite small. So I've seen the difference, but actually getting across how you can contribute to the purposes of that charity is what we would be looking for.
Brilliant. Okay. So I think what you've started to touch on there leads us perfectly, very nicely lined up there, Anj, to my next question. It's about what are those must-have elements? What are the real key things? And you were talking about a couple of those there. Is there anything else that you'd like to expand on that you would think are, you know, these are the absolute must-have things that need to be in that CV?
Yeah, I think some key skills that are maybe also personal attributes can be useful in a trustee CV. So I'm good at crisis management, handling conflict, all of these kind of things, because when we make decisions around a trustee board, we make those as the collective. So we have legal responsibilities, even though that role's not paid. And so showcasing how you might handle the different scenarios that would come up in a trusteeship in a sector that sometimes you're very unfamiliar or unconfident in, will give some reassurance to the person that receives it.
Brilliant. Okay. And David, from an NED perspective, how do you feel about that question? What are the must-have elements there for you, do you think?
I think the must-have elements are slightly different, because I see exactly where Anj is coming from a trustee point of view. In a commercial NED, people are buying, as I've said before, they're buying your skills and experience. That's what you need to show. This is what I did. This is when I did it. The only bit that you would probably change and perhaps highlight a bit more is two things. One, if you've had any NED stroke governance experience, even if it's only something which you consider less important, like, you know, governor of a primary school or whatever, actually that shows that you've been involved, you understand, and you've been able to step back. And similarly, if you've been involved in board committees in your executive career, again, worth highlighting, because again, it shows that you've got that understanding of being a non-executive. And I think the other bit is remembering that a non-exec is what it says on the tin. It is not an executive role. And therefore, if you've got anything else in your CV which shows that you've been able to be an advisor, you've stepped back from, you know, actually getting your fingers dirty, that's quite important. So it could be, again, just something of thinking of off the top of my head. You know, you've been a mentor for the Prince's Trust. shows that you can stand back.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. And if we've started to better understand, talk about some of the things that are the must-have things, it's only right that we should consider some of the things that we might like to try and avoid. So again, David, if I stay with you on that one, from the NED perspective, if I'm applying now for a role that you are looking for, and it's an NED role, what are some of the things that I should avoid doing on my CV?
I don't think there's anything particular that you know, without being banal and stupid about it, there's nothing you should really avoid.
Okay.
But you know, remember, nobody's interested in how many kids you've got, whether you walk your dogs every day, whether you like skiing. That's kind of irrelevant in the CV. Yes, you might get into it at a later date, but that's it. Other than that, it is what it says on tin. Although I would agree with Anj, absolutely, 2 pages probably the maximum.
Okay. And is there anything specific that jumps out to you as something to avoid, Anj, from a trustee application point of view?
Yeah, again, slightly different. I just want to come back to some things David mentioned before, though. I think that thinking about the relevance of other roles that could relate to trusteeship. So have you volunteered? Have you been on a PTA? Have you been a school governor? Those kind of things are also valuable on trustee CVs. And then some things to avoid. Again, it's slightly different because it's not showcasing your commercial expertise on a charity board. So do avoid the jargon. Remember that the people who are reading your CV are other trustees who come from different walks of life, who have different professional expertise. Some are there because they bring lived experience, and most of them are unlikely to have had any kind of exposure to interviewing or reading a CV. So don't confuse them at the first contact.
Okay, right. Good to know. I'm sure, like everybody else that's watching us today, we're picking up some really, really good insights, and there's a real there's what I'm finding fascinating is that there's some areas of similarity between the NED role and trustee, but then there's some differences as well, which I think is really good to explore what they are. And from a trustee point of view, if I was applying for a trustee position, how could I use my application to sort of stand out from the crowd? And I'm asking that because I know we sometimes talk about that in terms of a regular job application, and I know that you've been talking about what you are appealing, and your application is going to other trustees. How might I stand out to them to be, this is the person we need him? How would I do that?
Or her. Or
Her
they.
or them. Yeah, I know. Yeah, absolutely.
So what I would say would be, this is where the cover letter really comes into its own, and your cover letter shouldn't be a rehash of your CV. They are 2 entirely different things that support your application, and the cover letter is your opportunity to get across your enthusiasm for joining that charity board. A lot of people talk about passion. We're not always passionate, first of all, when we join a charity board. It takes getting used to it, and the first year is always a learning curve. But I think doing your research, and it's very easy to do some research on the Charity Commission website. You can search for the charity, download the trustee annual report, which is what will tell you what they did in the previous year. Have a look at their website. If they're so small they don't have a website, but they have a social media presence, check that out. What kind of things have they done, and why are you interested in doing it? And also use things like LinkedIn to research the other people around the board. I've talked already about you make decisions as a collective. Well, in this case, could you fit in? Are you interested? What is it? And then, there's nothing more flattering to fellow trustees, because trustees recruit trustees. It's not the chief exec that recruits the trustees. what will make them think this person is going to be a really great addition to our team, because you are a team of volunteers with legal responsibilities.
Okay, brilliant. And do you find, it's a bit of a sub question to this, you were talking about social media and website, which would obviously show the activities that the charity is doing. Is there a sense that if I was applying, I should look at what they are to decide whether or not they're activities that I'd want to do? Because that I'm probably going to get, if I get that passion that you were talking about, having been a trustee for a while, I'm going to get drawn into being involved in some of those charitable activities. Is that something I should take into consideration as well?
A really good question, because David kind of touched on that before, about that you are not an executive. But with small charities, when assets and resources are scarce, you do end up rolling, getting you mucking in and maybe doing some activities that you wouldn't do on maybe a larger charity board. So, there isn't a one size fits all with this, because of the spectrum of the size and scale of charities that I talked about. So it really is about good decision making, and can you make that those governance decisions with the information and the things that you have. And if that's what interests you, that is what will keep you on that charity board. With a more medium-sized charity, let's say the arts charity that I chaired, we would have experiences, so we'd go to some of our productions, but we would not work behind the scenes and help out on those productions. Just as a practical example, in a very small community-based arts charity, you might do that. So that's the difference.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, and David, from an NED perspective then, how might I stand out from other applicants?
I think it's very much the same as what Anj was saying. Cover letter, which should be short and to the point. Just highlight the bits that are in your CV, because they are going to bother to read your CV. Highlight the bits that are in the CV that are really important, you think, to that role, which means that you have to have done your research. But just caution, don't try and show that you know more than the non-execs, because you don't. You can say something along the lines of, this is what you're doing, therefore, and this is the experience, or whatever. But just highlight a couple of 3 or 4 points, no more than that. And the other thing, and this sounds really creepy, but it's true, and I'm sure Anj mentioned it. Look at who the other non-exec directors are, and look them up on LinkedIn. They will be flattered to see that you've bothered to actually look at them, and because it'll flick up, oh, Anj has looked at David's resume on LinkedIn. It's very simple, but it shows that you actually are doing your research, because there's no other way that you can show it until you start to meet them.
Okay, yeah, no, that's really good advice. And what's really coming through is that sort of connection between the CV and the cover letter from you both, which I think is really, really interesting and very good advice for people who are watching this live or watching us on catch up. So is there anything else that I should consider? And David, I'll stay with you on this one, if I may. Anything else you think I should consider as part of that, I'm going to say, application package, the CV as well as the cover letter? Anything else I should consider?
I think it's more fundamental than that. You need to think, why do I want to be a non-exec? What is it that I am? It goes back to what Anj was saying, there are multiple different reasons. Why do I want to be a non-exec? Most important question, have I got time? Because it's all very flattering, especially if somebody rings you up and says, would you like to be a non-exec? It's very flattering, but this is going to impact on your day job. I have a very unfashionable view that somebody who has a senior executive job will struggle in most other commercial, especially if they're quoted commercial non-exec positions. Reason? If they're going to spend 20 to 25 days working on the non-exec, and they're going to take 20 to 25 days holiday, and everybody says, oh, well, I'll do it all at the weekend. Well, actually, no, weekends were designed for a reason, because if we work 24/7, we get absolutely exhausted and burn out. But if you're taking 50 days a year or 40 days a year away from your day job, that's 16 to 20%.
Yeah.
And you need to think about that very carefully before you take anything on.
Okay.
And the worst thing that you can do is take something on and fail at it, because the non-exec community, especially in commercial sector, is very well connected, people talk. And, you know, you do hear, well, they haven't actually contributed a great deal, or they never turned up to meetings or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. And just staying on that for a second, just to ask you one other thing, if I may, is where we're talking about a cover letter, and you said, you know, be really clear about why you want to be an NED. Would you be that directive in the cover letter, saying absolutely that this is why I want that role, this is why I want to be the NED? It's very difficult. It's going to depend on on where it's going to land. I think it's more important in the trustee sector and in the not-for-profit than it is in the commercial, because in the commercial world, guess what? Everybody knows why you're doing it. Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you for that. And so, anything else that I should consider from the trustee perspective then?
Yeah, David's covered quite a few of them, but I just want to drill into a couple. So the time thing isn't just about the time of attending meetings and reading the board papers. Are there any other requirements of you? So some charities might require you to also join a committee, and so that almost doubles your workload. So you have to consider that. What about the logistics? So where are the meetings held? Can you get to them? You know, if you live somewhere rural and you rely on public transport, maybe don't waste your time applying for that role. And also think about the size and the scale of that charity as well. So if a charity is in startup phase, it's likely they'll need more help with governance and other things, which will take time for you to help them. And again, that rolling up of sleeves. If they're a bit more established or slightly larger, you would hope that they have some of the key policies and procedures in place. So those are other factors that I think you should consider.
Brilliant.
And the other thing, and I'm sure Anj would agree with this, when people talk about the time commitment for a non-exec role, especially actually in the not-for-profit sector, and even more so in the public sector, they're lying.
Yeah, I second that. Double it at least.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, especially in the public sector, if you're going into an NHS trust and they tell you it's 2 days a month, they mean 2 days a week.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, David.
And you know, David, you were saying about some non-exec, some NEDs and some trustees will be flattered, I think was the word you used, would be flattered that you'd looked at their LinkedIn profile before an application. Would you also advocate making contact and connecting with that person to be able to find out much more before you put the actual application in?
No, not at that stage. Unless you can get to them on one connection. So if you know somebody who knows them, maybe, but even then I would do it at a later stage, because especially if it's an advertised appointment, they don't want 100 people ringing them up and pestering them. And they don't know you from bar or soap. They don't know what, they haven't seen your CV at that stage. No, don't, absolutely not, I wouldn't say.
Okay.
Slightly different for charities though, Dean. Okay. I think that's important to say. It would, and that flattery, because it's an unpaid role, largely we are flattered and would like to have a chat, because even if it's a not now, it's a maybe later. Okay.
And I think it's really, really good for people watching to be able to get that, clarity of difference between an NED role and a trustee role from those sort of, unique factors around whether to approach or not approach, because, it's really helping people to understand, well, what should I do? What shouldn't I do? Before we finish then, what I'd quite like to do is to dip into what you think the top tips are then for, I'm going to change the question slightly, that it's not just about the CV, it's about the cover letter, it's about the package, if you like, of application. And from your perspective, what are the sort of the top tips you could share with us? Some of them may be things we've already talked about, but
I think so. I think we've covered the practical, but one thing people don't do enough of is really to have some self-reflection around their motivations and put aside the time for the research before they apply. If you do those things, your application will definitely stand out, because it will show that you have put some thought and time aside to make that application.
Brilliant. David, what about yourself? What's your thoughts?
I think, again, we've covered most of it. You do your research, make sure that if you've got a cover letter, it brings out where you will be able to add value. And most importantly, don't muck it up. I mean, if you're applying for a job and you're sending it to you send it to dear chairman, and it's a woman, it kind of it's not going to land well. Or you're sending off 5 applications in a week and you forget to change the name of where you're applying to. I know it sounds really simple and straightforward, but trust me, it happens pretty regularly.
I can imagine it does. While we've been talking, there's been a question come in which I just want to share, because it was on that subject around connecting or not connecting on LinkedIn. And Anita is asking us, are there any good groups or pages on LinkedIn to join that would be beneficial? What's your thoughts on that, Anj? I saw you smiling when that question came in. I don't know if that's a smile to say, I want to answer that, or it's a smile to say, please ask David, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
No, you know what I'm going to say. Follow Getting On Board, because they do share lots of information about charity trusteeships and have a free trustee learning program throughout the year as well. Follow, it depends. There are other groups as well. There's the Young Trustees Movement, if you're under 30, Action for Trustee Racial Diversity, Association of Chairs, Black on Board, just to name but a few. So have a look around and think, if you start with a couple of those that I've just mentioned, you'll no doubt find others. And if you're on Twitter, every Wednesday in the evening, there's #Charity Hour, a great way to connect with other charities.
Brilliant. And David, what about from an NED perspective?
Well, it doesn't work for everybody, but Women on Boards is a good one. And other than that, just that's the only one that I can think of off the top of my head on a LinkedIn in the commercial sector.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that. I thought it was a nice question, and and a nice little. I did like this smiling from you there, Anj. It was like, give me that question. Give me that question. So, is there anything else that you want to add before we depart this LinkedIn Live today? Anything else that any other aspects of it that you'd like to bring up that we haven't already discussed?
I have one, if I may, because like David touched on it. Multiple applications. All right, that's fine. Make sure you don't muck it up, as he said, but keep a long list. Keep a long list, a short list. Spreadsheet's good. Links of the advert, date you applied, all of that kind of thing, because the time process can be quite long with trusteeships. It might be a while before you're here. So keep a list of them, and at least you can go back to refer to them, maybe keep a Dropbox or a Google folder of your applications, so that you're not caught out if they do contact you further down the line.
Brilliant. Okay. David, anything else that we haven't we haven't already covered?
I don't think so. I think, you know, the real important thing though is, and Anj started on this, think about why you're doing it and have you got the time.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's a really good point for us to finish on today, is that part in think about the why, have you got time? I think that's really, that's where there is similarities in both NED and Trustee. Can I just then say before we finish 2 things? One, I need to do a quick plug for our next LinkedIn Live, which is around avoiding burnout. But can I also just thank you both personally for, I've really enjoyed spending half an hour with you today and learning much more around NED trustee positions and how somebody might go about applying. So can I just say thank you very much for joining me today, both of you.
My pleasure.
And I will end the stream now, and thank you everybody for joining us today.